Okay, let's dive into a really challenging exchange. We're looking at Jeremiah chapter 44 today.
Right. This is a message that Jeremiah delivers to the Jewish remnant, the ones who went down to Egypt after Jerusalem fell.
Yeah, they'd scattered to places like Migdal, Tapanes, Memphis, basically across Lower and Upper Egypt.
Exactly. And this chapter, it captures this really intense, direct confrontation.
It's Jeremiah bringing God's word as the source presented. Right.
Yes. And on the other side, you have the people just adamantly refusing to listen.
And they have their own interpretation of why everything fell apart.
Completely. It's a real clash of perspectives with, well, pretty severe consequences laid out. It's quite the deep dive.
Okay, so let's start with that initial message from Jeremiah. What's God's opening statement, according to the text?
Well, it starts by pointing to something they all knew, something they'd just lived through.
The fall of Jerusalem.
Right. The message says, effectively, you saw the disaster I brought on Jerusalem and Judah's towns. Look at them now deserted, in ruins. He grounds it in their immediate, devastating experience.
So acknowledging the shared trauma first. But then it explains why it happened.
Precisely. The text says the disaster struck because of the evil they have done.
And it gets specific.
Very specific. It calls out burning incense and worshiping other gods, gods that, weren't part of their tradition, that neither they nor you nor your fathers ever knew. This, the text says, is what provoked God's anger.
Okay, and this wasn't something that came out of the blue, was it? The message mentions warnings.
Absolutely. It stresses that God had sent prophets repeatedly, his servants telling them, do not do this detestable thing that I hate.
But the warnings were ignored.
That's the lament in the message. It says they did not listen or pay attention. They did not turn from their wickedness or stop burning incense to other gods.
So the ruins they literally just fled from.
Mm.
The message is saying that's the result. That's the direct consequence of ignoring those warnings and sticking with the idolatry.
That's the explicit connection being made. Therefore, it says, God's fierce anger was poured out. It raged against the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, and that's what made them the desolate ruins they are today. History, in this view, is cause and effect, actions and divine response.
Okay, so that sets the stage, explaining the past. But then Jeremiah turns to their present situation, right? They're in Egypt.
Yes, he pivots. The message directly challenges what they're doing now, in Egypt. It asks them, why bring such great disaster on yourselves?
How are they doing that?
By repeating the pattern. The message asks why they're cutting off from Judah the men and women, the children and infants, basically ensuring there's no remnant left by doing the same things in their new home.
And those same things are.
Again, it's explicit. Why provoke me to anger with what your hands have made, burning incense to other gods in Egypt where you have come to live? It seems they didn't leave the practices behind.
They brought the idolatry with them into exile.
It appears so. And they're provoking the same anger, just in a different location.
And the outcome predicted for this, it sounds just as bad.
It's stark. The message warns, you will destroy yourselves and make yourselves an object of cursing and reproach among all the nations on earth. Essentially, the same fate that befell Judah will find them in Egypt if they continue.
And the text links this current behavior back to that whole history of disobedience, doesn't it?
Yes, it emphasizes this pattern, this continuity of sin.
Yeah.
It asks if they've forgotten the wickedness of their ancestors, their kings, their queens, even their own wickedness back in Judah.
It's like saying, haven't you learned anything?
Pretty much. It points out that even to this day they have not humbled themselves or shown reverence, nor have they followed my law and the decrees. It's arguing the lesson from the destruction hasn't sunk in.
So it sounds like, from God's perspective in the text, the decision about this group in Egypt is, well, it's made.
According to the source, yes. God states very clearly, I am determined to bring disaster on you and to destroy all Judah, referring specifically to this remnant in Egypt.
And their fate.
It's described in chilling detail. They will all perish in Egypt. They will fall by the sword or die from famine. From the least to the greatest, they will become an object of cursing and horror, of condemnation and reproach.
So the punishment will be the same as what happened to Jerusalem: sword, famine, plague.
The text explicitly says that. I will punish those who live in Egypt with the sword, famine, and plague as I punish Jerusalem. It draws a direct parallel.
And escape.
Mhm.
Is there any hope of returning to Judah?
The message is incredibly bleak on that point. None of the remnant who have gone to live in Egypt will escape or survive to return. None will return, except, and this is key, a few fugitives.
Wow, just a handful. So near total destruction predicted for this community in Egypt.
That's the picture painted. It's a heavy, heavy message, explaining the past disaster, warning of a future one for the exact same reasons, even in their supposed place of safety.
You'd think, especially after seeing Jerusalem fall, that this kind of message would hit hard, really hard.
You absolutely would. But like you said earlier, this is where the whole thing takes such a dramatic turn. How do they respond?
Right. This isn't just Jeremiah talking into the void. How does this large group react?
Yeah, and the text emphasizes the size of the group responding. It wasn't just a few dissenters. It mentions all the men who knew that their wives were burning incense, plus all the women who were present, a large assembly, and all the people living in Lower and Upper Egypt. It sounds like a broad consensus.
Okay, so a significant portion of the community. And their answer.
It's stunningly defiant. No hesitation, no, let's think about this. The source gives their direct words to Jeremiah. We will not listen to the message you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord.
Just a flat refusal.
The complete rejection, unequivocal.
And they don't stop there, do they? They actually commit to doing the opposite of what Jeremiah warned against.
Exactly. They make a countervow. They say, we will certainly do everything we said we would. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and will pour out drink offerings to her.
The Queen of Heaven. This is the specific deity they're clinging to.
Yes, often identified with figures like Ishtar or Astarte in the ancient Near East, a powerful goddess figure associated with, well, various things like fertility, sometimes war. It was a prominent form of the pagan worship Israel was warned against.
And they say they'll keep doing it, just like they used to.
Just like we and our fathers, our kings and our officials did in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, they're explicitly tying their current actions to past practices.
Okay, this is defiance. But they offer a reason, right? And their reason turns Jeremiah's whole explanation upside down.
This is the crucial part, their interpretation of history. It's fascinating and, well, tragic from the text's viewpoint. They justify this persistence based on how they remember things.
How so?
They claim that back when they were actively worshiping the Queen of Heaven in Judah, we had plenty of food and were well off and suffered no harm.
Wait, so they're saying when we did the thing God says caused the disaster, life was good.
That is precisely their argument, and they draw a sharp contrast with what happened after they supposedly stopped.
Let me guess.
They continue, but ever since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have had nothing and have been perishing by sword and famine.
So their narrative is the complete inverse of Jeremiah's. Disaster didn't happen because of the idolatry. It happened because they stopped the idolatry.
That's the shocking claim they make. It really shows how, personal experience, or at least the memory and interpretation of experience, can completely block out a prophetic warning, especially a tough one.
And the women were involved in this too.
Oh, yes. The text adds the women chimed in, confirming they made the offerings and cakes shaped like her image, and importantly, that their husbands knew all about it. It was a shared community practice.
This is quite a standoff. Two totally opposing views of cause and effect based on the same recent history. So, how does Jeremiah counter this specific argument, their claim about past prosperity?
He tackles it directly. He speaks to the whole assembly again and goes right after their historical interpretation.
What's his point?
He asks them, essentially, do you think God didn't notice, didn't remember all that incense your ancestors, your leaders, everyone burned back then? He's saying God was fully aware of that worship during their supposed good times.
So he's not denying the worship happened then, but he's denying their conclusion about why things flowed okay.
Exactly. And then he hammers home the real cause of the destruction, as presented in the message. He says, when the Lord could no longer endure your wicked actions and the detestable things you did, then your land became an object of cursing, a desolate waste, as it is today.
He's pointing to the ruins again, saying that's the result of God's patience running out with their behavior, not the result of stopping it.
Precisely. He ties the visible desolation directly to their long-term actions. He says, because you have burned incense and have sinned against the Lord and have not obeyed him, this disaster has come upon you, as you now see. He uses the present reality as evidence against their nostalgic, self-serving memory. It's a direct refutation.
Okay, so the lines are clearly drawn. God's word via Jeremiah, disobedience caused ruin. The people's response, no, stopping our worship of the Queen of Heaven caused ruin.
Yeah.
What happens next? Where does it go from here? What's the final word?
The source then presents God's final pronouncement, and it really feels like a point of no return has been crossed.
How so?
God acknowledges their defiant stance, their vows to the Queen of Heaven. It's almost like he says, okay, you've made your choice. The text quotes God. You and your wives have shown by your actions what you promised. We will certainly carry out the vows.
And then,
Then Gog says, almost ironically, go ahead then, do what you promised, keep your vows. But it doesn't sound like blessing or permission. It sounds like, fine, walk that path and face the consequences.
it really does sound final, like the door's shut.
And it's immediately followed by this incredibly severe oath from God. He swears by his own name.
What's the oath?
He declares that no one from Judah living anywhere in Egypt will ever again invoke my name or swear, as surely as the sovereign Lord lives. It's this powerful act of dissociation. His name won't be on their lips anymore.
And this reinforces the judgment that was predicted earlier.
Directly. God states, "For I am watching over them for harm, not for good. The Jews in Egypt will perish by sword and famine until they are all destroyed." Any lingering doubt about their fate is removed.
And that detail about only a few fugitives escaping.
That's reiterated too. Those who escape the sword and return from Egypt will be very few. It underscores the scale of the predicted destruction in Egypt. Minimal survival.
And wasn't there a specific sign given, something tangible to prove this would all happen?
Yes, the source provides a sign to confirm that these threats aren't empty words, and it involves the very place they fled to,
Egypt itself.
the ruler of Egypt. God says, "This will be the sign to you. I am going to hand Pharaoh Hophra, king of Egypt, over to his enemies who seek his life."
Wow, so the political stability they thought they found was part of the sign of judgment.
Exactly. The refuge is shown to be insecure, and the text makes an explicit, chilling connection to their immediate past.
Oh.
It says, "This will happen just as I handed Zedekiah, king of Judah, over to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the enemy who was seeking his life."
Oof. So the fate of the Egyptian king they're relying on will mirror the fate of their own recently defeated king.
Precisely. It ties their predicted doom in Egypt directly to the catastrophe they just witnessed in Judah. It's saying, the power you trust in now is just as vulnerable to my judgment as the kingdom you lost. It leaves no room for misunderstanding.
So wrapping this up, Jeremiah 44 presents this incredibly stark conflict. On one hand, God's message. Disaster follows disobedience. On the other, the people's lived experience or their memory of it, telling them the opposite. Prosperity came with idolatry. Hardship came when they stopped.
Yeah, it's a powerful illustration of resistance to, well, an unwelcome message. Even after seeing Judah destroyed, supposedly for these reasons, they cling to their own narrative, the one that justifies their current actions. They double down.
And that choice, that refusal to listen based on their own interpretation, leads to this absolute finality in the text, the oath, the sign involving Pharaoh Hophra, sealing their predicted fate in Egypt.
It's presented as a point of no return, tragically mirroring the destruction they thought they had escaped.
It definitely leaves you thinking, how do we react when faced with truths that challenge our choices or beliefs, especially when our own past experiences seem to tell a different story?
Right. And how easily can we interpret events, maybe even hardships, in a way that confirms what we want to believe, rather than confronting a potentially harder truth about our own direction?
It's a tough question. When circumstances are difficult, is the pull stronger towards familiar explanations, even flawed ones, or towards messages that demand maybe a really uncomfortable change? What are the signs around us, and are we reading them right?